Got it.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt Santee, joined today by the science fairy, Laura Weilert.
Hi.
So Laura and I actually met a few years ago, online met, the way we're all meeting now, but we've met online a few years ago when I was doing, I think we called it Nerd Study Hall or something.
Yeah, it was book related articles.
We'd read an article and then come together and talk about it, or a book. Yeah, something. So anyway, so since then I've been following you, Laura, on Facebook and watching all your cool science stuff that you're doing. And I'm glad to have you. So tell folks what you want them to know about you before we start our conversation.
Okay, I guess probably the oddball thing is I'm not from early childhood education. So I am learning all the ropes and things that are really cool and matter a lot, which has been a really exciting journey. So actually I'm a scientist, or I was in another life. And I loved explaining science, but I didn't want to be a journalist or anything like that. So, I did a few lab trips, so lots of pipetting and things. Realized I like people, and the same 5 people every day is probably not the best for extroversion.
That's fair.
Yeah, so that's a little bit of the start. I grew up babysitting and working with kids, and it was always fun.
Yeah.
And then after the lab, just decided I want to make more of a difference, so I went into nonprofit to learn that and worked with homeless families, which was a really cool, eye-opening experience and lovely. So eventually I was like, I need to do something with a science degree, and then had to get creative and had some mentors and some wonderful people. And suddenly I was like, oh, I could be a mobile STEM teacher, and I can go to multiple childcares, work with different groups of kids, and have fun and make, experiments and play and all that. And so I called it the Science Fairy.
Yeah. And where are you located?
Oh, yes. Right now I'm in Colorado Springs.
Yeah. So people around there will know to look you up now to get your mobile science center to them.
Exactly. They'll look me up, or they'll see me driving on the road and be like, she drives like a crazy mom in a minivan. Who's the Science Fairy? Google that.
Google it. There you go. And what else, Laura? What else do you want to talk about?
I want to talk about like the kids and just how wonderful they are.
Yeah. Awesome. That's what we do.
I know. I've heard you talk about that before.
Yeah. So you sent me a quote that you wanted to use as our starter. And I asked you to do that. I don't want anyone to think you just barged in with your quote and a hammer or something. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. I'm past.
It's okay. I let kids use a hammer in one experiment too, and it's
perfect. Fun. Okay. So anyway, so you have this quote that you supplied to me from Sally Ride.
Yes.
Astronaut Sally Ride. Science is fun. Science is curiosity. We all have natural curiosity. Science is a process of investigating. It's posing questions and coming up with a method. It's delving in. So I think the first thing I want to ask you to do is just talk about that quote and why was that your choice? What?
I think it's been really interesting. So I redesigned my website recently. I'll go off on a business tangent. And they just put in all these pictures of the perfect teacher. I just realized that it's really loud. The perfect teacher, everyone in their lines, everyone's papers, all these stock photography of what they thought early childhood education was about. And I'm just reminded of my time this morning with little Zane, and he can't not grab the next thing that I'm pulling out of my tub, or he's going straight for the tub, which is like my big number one no, that's my tub. You respect it. We do the activities in order. But it looked like utter chaos. But he is experiencing that, just delving in, because his method for how do I figure out this new material is I'm going to touch it. I'm going to grab it. It's perfectly developmentally appropriate, but it's not what people expect out of early education. And then you go read something from a accomplished astronaut, and she's like, yeah, it was supposed to be all that fun stuff we did when we were kids.
Yeah. And so people talk a lot, and I think most of the time when I hear it, it sort of sounds like a cliche or like lip service, but people talk
Yeah.
all the time about how children are the ultimate scientists. And I mean, I believe that's true, but I think a lot of times people say that not really understanding how children are scientists.
It's a different experimentation method.
And I'm teaching a class on early childhood curriculum this semester, so of course we're talking about all the STEM things, breaking them down and looking at what it really means at these different ages. And you Google that and you're going to get pictures of volcano experiments and planets or something like that. So with all that said, I just want to hear you talk about
that. Okay.
about what it what it really does mean when we say
yeah. We'll go to the volcano, okay? Because the volcano irks me. First of all, volcanoes work from magma that starts under the ground, not something you pour into the reaction vessel. First of all. Second, we do art, so we put all this like fancy volcano stuff around it. You can't see the reaction. Like that's the important part of the science, is the reaction. So I do one in a like tall glass vase, and I get, this is my favorite, I call it unicorn blood. So you take red cabbage and boil it, and it turns into an indicator. So at neutral pH, it's purple, acidic, it's pink, and basic, it's like green yellow. And so we do the reaction with those cabbage dye in it, so they can see the pink, or sorry, the blue in the bottom react with a pink at top, and then it goes back to purple as it fizzes everywhere. But it's the actual reaction. It's not this idea of science that we have, which I think is what you're talking about with the volcano. Is it's this idea of that, and you go on Pinterest and everything's food color science, which is a great segue, Heather, to my book.
Perfect. You're doing great, Laura.
Okay. So my book takes down and breaks real steps. So there is a science one, which is about corn and different things you can do with corn kernels and all these different things. Then there's one with electricity. There's one with money. And that includes a technology, a blockchain Bitcoin game that I have on film because it's a how-to manual. So I have films of how to do it. Okay. And I have a YouTube of me teaching 2 4-year-olds blockchain. And like, they mostly get it.
All right. I didn't expect that, but go on.
So these are truly technology, engineering, and math, because it's easy to do science for the most part. There's a lot of ideas out there. So when I've been really hitting on those other 3, that's all these books. So each of the future books. So the first one is free. So it's a month long of STEM activities for every day. And it's got shopping lists, so everything is lined up per where you buy it. And it's got a glossary, and it's an ebook, so it uses the best of the tablet without being a tablet for the children, so that the teacher's holding their tablet. I've got a little magnifier clip you can get for $7 that you put over the camera, and it acts as a zoom lens and a microscope. And then I'm recommending it to directors because teachers are already there with the tablet, so they can get those great active pictures, because I tell you, STEM experiments are great pictures, as you've seen on Facebook. They're a lot of fun. Marketing, exactly.
Yeah. So we could, where do they get it? Do you have a website? What's your website?
I know, I have a domain, actually. It was tricky to get, but I got it. So it's books.thatsciencefairy.com. Books.thatsciencefairy.com.
Okay. So you're That Science Fairy and not The Science Fairy.
The kids and most of my customers know me as a science fairy, Miss Science Fairy.
Because I get very picky if people call me the early childhood nerd.
Yeah, because you've got that thing going on too.
Besides, and not that early childhood nerd. Yeah, so we're like early childhood nerd twins or something.
I know, nerdy.
Yeah,
we got the education on it.
Yeah. So, I guess I was coming in expecting to really just talk about science, but can we go math for a minute?
Yes, we can go math.
So we, like I said, I'm teaching this class, and we just had a conversation about math in the early years and what the foundational kinds of skills are. And Indiana's, early learning standards are called the foundations. It's pretty appropriate. It lines up pretty well with appropriate expectations at 5 different age stages.
Yeah.
So we talked about how it's really more about sort of helping children develop the skill of thinking mathematically.
Mm-hmm.
And because as an adult, I'm not math confident, I had a hard time answering some of their questions about, I mean, I could talk about activities and skills, but I couldn't connect it to like the kinds of things that they're expecting to happen math wise later. So is that, so what are your thoughts on that?
Thoughts on, I think this is my strong thought. Are we ready to lead with that?
I'm ready.
Okay, kindergarten readiness. What do kids need to count to?
Oh,
10.
It depends on who you ask.
Okay, well, okay, maybe it's helpful, but here in the early ed classes I took, it was they need to be able to count to 10. That's it. You know, move on.
Yeah.
Which is just so erroneous because 10 is a confusing number.
Yeah.
And it works really well if kids go into math and don't understand 11 or 12, because 10 and 100 kind of makes sense when they start hearing the word percents for different things. It makes sense for prices. But when banks are trying to get loans out to people who can understand that 11 would be 10%, that looks a lot more significant. So if people can only go to 10 in their early education, the whole concept of more than 10 or more than 100 doesn't match up with the foundation that the kids have. So my big deal is you count until 12, because you have to memorize every single syllable up to 12. And then you just kind of do this little language wobble. So if you say 310, 410, 510, 16, 710, there's a little bit of a pattern to get them to that 20. And once they get the pattern at 20, it all just opens up for them in math. And we don't do that. So 12 is my big deal. That, and I learned this from a book by a really nerdy math person. And she said that the reason kids will get to 6 and then they kind of go, and then it takes them a while, and they'll do that for months and months and months, because the teachers aren't realizing that 7 has 2 syllables. So if kids are doing their appropriate one-to-one association, then they get to 7 and it doesn't make sense. And
it
so
disrupts the pattern.
It's not a pattern.
Yeah. Who's the nerdy math author? My husband's a nerdy math guy. Maybe he knows who she is.
Her name is Eugenia Cheng, and her book is How to Bake Pie. And
P-I. Yeah, I'll have to ask him if he knows that one.
Yeah.
As I'm thinking about it, I think in Indiana, in the early learning standards, it says that an older preschool child, a 5-year-old, should be able to count 1 to 10. And by the end of kindergarten, they want them counting to 20.
Yeah.
Or writing the numbers 1 to 20 by the end of kindergarten or something like that. Were you going to say something else?
I think we forget that numeracy, and I've noticed this more as a parent, is that we teach math skills and counting, but we don't take advantage of like child-led opportunities for being like, oh, well, you'd understand that a little more and have more fun with that if you realized it was related to math. And I think there's a lot of instances where, so my daughter and I, for example, have this little cork collector. So I'm having my daughter play with wine corks, but whatever.
Nice.
So we put them in 1, 2, and we alternate. And so I'm counting with her. And so she's trying to figure out which spot she goes in, because that's the actual sensory game. It doesn't matter what the counting is, but it's establishing a positive association with numbers. And so many kids, and I'm sure you did probably when you were young, not going into math later, is there's just this negative connotation with big numbers, especially.
Yeah. I think math, I mean, I know math was hard for me. I was just talking about this with my husband. I can remember sitting, and I went to a very small high school in a very small town in Nebraska. And there were like 24 kids in my graduating class. And there were like 3 math classes you could take, and we all took them together and just moved through. And but I remember vividly sitting in one of those math classes and thinking, you all must have been to a secret meeting that I wasn't at, because they all knew what he was talking about. And it was all like brand new language for me. And so I grew up feeling like, I can't do math, and I didn't like it because I wasn't good at it.
Right.
But, and even now at the community college where I am, I don't know about the statistics now, but before I was program chair, another program chair told me that they had, it was not unusual for an early childhood degree seeking student to not finish their degree with only the math class left, because they were so intimidated by that. And I think it's hard then for people who have that math anxiety, and I think this fits for science too, regardless of whether it's gender related or not. Sometimes that's a stereotype, but anyway, I feel like it's hard to expect them to go in with confidence to try and meet what children need at these ages for their science and math sort of foundational skills, or to see the science and math that happens in play, because in our minds, science and math is this scary, hard thing.
Right, versus what they're actually probably guiding the children in organically.
Yeah, so there's I remember her saying, you know more math than you know. Yeah. After watching them and observing them interact with children during play and during different activities.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, math has been good. So I was struggling because every state has a different math, completely different standards, right?
Yeah, right.
It's weird that way.
Yeah.
But then there's Common Core, I'm like, I've heard these things. What do I do with that? So in writing the book, I wanted to align to standards and be accessible to people from all states and regions. And so reading through them was really interesting.
Yeah, I bet it was.
How do we get there? But I realized that a lot of the activities, going back to what they're doing in play, I started the activity and then I looked down, I'm like, oh, wait, that is this standard. I got to it backwards. And I think if teachers could be coached a little bit on that, from where the play transitions into just a little slight difference in instruction, and suddenly you've met a math standard. So that's what I was hoping to do with all those activities in the book. They almost all have a math standard that they reach. So yeah, but math it's an interesting realm.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to circle back to science for a minute, because there were two things I talked about. One was the volcano and one was the all children are scientists question. Okay. So I want to come back to that and just see, what's your reaction to that? Because that, a meme with that quote and it pops up in my Facebook timeline at least once a week by people who I know are not
really
maybe really allowing the kind of appropriate experiences that allow children to be the scientists they're calling them. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking now and see what your response.
Well, I was hoping to talk longer because it's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's a good one. Science is a way of knowing, and children don't yet know what they know or don't know. So they start off, babies trying to decide between light and shadow, and their eyes are going back and forth. So at some point, that biological process is going on. And now as they interact with adults, suddenly there's this other way of knowing, more the social emotional development. And then when they get to, 2 and 3, they're just really just taking everything in. And so there have to be a little like scientific and engineering of like how they're thinking, right? And that I think is one of the reasons we have childhood amnesia, is we're trying to adjust how we're learning into something that we can keep routing in our brains. And so, and then you hit the 3-5 level.
Kids level up to 3 and 4 and 5. Yep.
Yeah. So as they're in the like 3 range, then they're at least aware of how they process information, and that's how they're finding out what things they're good at and what things that are frustrating to them. And so a lot of kids, there will always be those few kids who are going to be the Sally Rides, the astronauts. Like they have that just very particular way of doing things that's very scientific and engineering. But what I found is there's a whole nother group of kids at that 3-4 age that acknowledge it as a way of knowing, but haven't tapped into it as a very valuable way of knowing. So what I hope to do is hit that middle there and say, here's value to exploring it this way. Like, ooh, if we all mix and stir correctly, suddenly the magnetic slime works and, you can all experience and touch it. But now they're thinking, oh, that patience, that persistence, that observation has gotten me a result that is interesting to my brain.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when we say there's little scientists and engineers, they're not these little, kids with slide rules in their pockets. Their way of knowing has to be based on the real world, which is a huge challenge now because kids are so digital. Like the real world, there's a disconnect there.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think, they're not necessarily little scientists and engineers, but they are scientific.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting distinction to think about, and maybe will help some folks sort of process the difference you just described. What kinds of things are your favorite things to do with young, children under 5 or under 6?
Yeah. I have a lot. So they're all small group designed because most of my classes are 8 kids. 3 to 5. Sometimes we have school agers in there, so that always throws a wrench in it.
Oh boy, that would be tricky. Yeah.
It's a fun wrench, but anyway, this is what I did this morning and I really liked it. So the project is called STEM in the Trees. And the idea is that we're looking at the straws on the outside of the trunk that take the sap up and down. Mm-hmm. And I have this huge 66-year-old tree ring that we bring in, and then we do a circle around that. And so I made up a song to ring around the rosy. And so the tree sap in the spring, we stop and do that. And then fall comes, and so I put 2 kids in the middle, and so they all take turns. Anyway, the middle ones, they fall down.
They fall down. Yeah.
Out of the ring. And so it's very gross motor and musical, and it's still scientific. So I like that one a lot. I tried it with a group today, though. It was a disaster.
That always happens.
The rosy. Like there was no base material to work from.
Yeah. They didn't know Ring Around the Rosie. Yeah. That goes back to an episode from a while back when Lisa and I talked about kids not being exposed to nursery rhymes anymore. But yeah. Wow. Yeah, that would derail your plan.
Yeah, it was a bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, I like most of the activities I do, but it's fun when I can hit another domain of learning. That's not just all science and technology.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I mean, that fits too with what we know about how young children learn. They learn best when their bodies are moving and they're actively engaged with something and not just sitting back and watching you make the volcano erupt falsely. So yeah, that sounds like it could be a lot of fun for a small group of kids to do. Oh, I just lost my train of thought. Do you have another favorite idea while I try to regain my train of thought? I'll just put the whole weight of my podcast on your shoulders.
Okay. No task here. It's like I want to think of a technology one.
Oh yeah.
A good one for technology. That's kind of unique. Oh yeah, that one is pretty simple. So going back to moving our bodies, a gross motor. HTML code, right? It says HTML at the very beginning of a web page and says start reading this. And then at the very end it says /HTML caret. So I put HTML in the little carets and HTML/HTML in another thing. Glue that to a sign.
Yeah.
And we play red light, green light. So if it has a flash, that means you're stopping your coding. And you stop your coding. And then you go. And then you stop, and then you go. And it's just a simple coding thing. But if they ever get into coding, and now even at my age and doing entrepreneurial stuff, I have to get into coding a little bit. So their entire generation, 20 years before and back, is going to have to be aware of that slash.
Right. That's so are they big? Like I'm trying to think about a child recognizing all the little, yeah, okay, they're big. Yeah. So, okay. So let's talk about the technology part a little bit, because I know that is an issue you probably have strong feelings about, but the whole field kind of does, right? We are battling about we're blaming parents for technology, and we're trying to figure out how to, for letting children use technology too much and screen time. And we're battling inside our own programs sometimes for the way we use screens and what we call technology. And we think, oh, accreditation says we have to have technology, so we need computers in the classrooms.
That sounds great if you're selling computers.
Yeah. So just what are your thoughts on that, and how do you approach that as that science
I approach
fairy?
it with low tech, because the meaning of technology is solving a problem using science, and engineering is solving a problem using science repeatedly. So keeping those two in mind, my technology and engineering pair up pretty often together. So low tech is really where it's at. Like, I think kids understanding low tech is a big deal. There are lots of flashy ways to do it, and I think if you stay away from all of those, you're better off. So like one example would be, I do bridge building in another experiment, and I get bricks, and we talk about big rocks. And like, if kids have any geological or cultural knowledge, it's like those big rocks that you see, like people moved them there. Like the pyramids of Egypt. And then you take colored pencils and line them underneath, help them lift the brick up over the colored pencils, and roll it until the pencil in the back pops out. And then someone has to go and put that in front.
Oh, okay.
So how to move this brick without lifting it is the goal. And you do it with the technology of a colored pencil. I mean, it just kind of goes back to being engineers in technology with cassette tapes and a pencil.
Yes, many
That's
listeners will know what we're
right
talking
there.
about.
I know. That's engineering right there. Like, it all connects that way. And I think light is a fun one to do with technology because it affects so much. Sound, I do a sound technology one. So tuning forks, guitar strings, rubber bands over a Kleenex box, just to say, I want to create a sound. How do I do that with what I have? I do have a computer put together one. So I use a Raspberry Pi, which is a small little thing.
My husband has like 4 of them right over there.
Raspberry 2, Raspberry 4.
They all have names. And they're each for different projects. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
This is
so
funny.
I go to the thrift store and I get a keyboard. And kids hardly see keyboards anymore anyway.
Right.
So, and I get the ones with the high letters, and then we get a little screwdriver and pop them out and pop them off and see what's underneath. And that is the funnest thing ever.
Yeah.
And then plug all the computer in, and they get to make it work and unplug and do that kind of thing. So bringing down the tech a little bit is good, not only just for cost, but for just like they can play with it and break it, and it's not a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big concern is we get the tech, so we've got it in the center, but we don't ever then let them use it because it might get broken, and we got a grant to get it, so we'll never be able to get it again. And but accreditation says we have to have it, so the day they're here, we better have them out. So tell me again, what was your definition of technology at the beginning of that?
Technology is solving a problem using science.
So I think a lot of times when we hear technology, we think of equipment that we have to have, and not these kinds of processes that you're describing.
Process, that's a key word you pulled out there.
I could picture very clearly several preschool children's faces, preschool children that I know, their faces, if we tried to do that brick and colored pencil thing, they would be so into that, and really that would be so I got to find some place to find a group of kids to play with again now, so we can try.
And then you got to divide them in groups and make them compete now. Competition among 3 4-year-olds.
So that was really interesting. And to be fair, I think that I have to say this, to be fair, I think that in the NACI accreditation standards, when it talks about technology, at least when I was a director several years ago, it did say, any kind of like cameras and scales and things like that would meet the criteria. But I think the other thing with just getting equipment to meet those kinds of standards, or to meet, parent expectations of technology or whatever, we think it has to be really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're describing doesn't necessarily sound like it needs to be all that expensive.
Mm-hmm. That's the idea.
Yeah.
That's the idea.
So do you do a lot of thrift shopping for your stuff?
We have the best thrift store chain here. It's called the Arc.
Oh.
And they have the best stuff. There people can like organize and think what should go together and what's really valuable, but no one's going to notice it's valuable. So like, I'm just at awe of my 19th Street Arc thrift store.
Yeah.
There's another Walmart on 19th Street.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and actually I started a little vlog where I've only published like 2 episodes where I film myself going through. So I've got my daughter in the cart, and then like I've attached my phone to the back of the kid thing. And so
the kid thing.
I just zoom around like, oh, look at this. And like, I'm trying to find another grabber, those like things when you have surgery, you gotta grab.
Yeah.
Because there's a experiment where the kids lift up a paper helicopter and drop it, but they are never tall enough for it really to go.
To really get up there.
So
you've got to grab her.
So every time I go to the thrift store, I go over to the barrel where they have long, tall stuff. And I'm like, is there a grabber in here?
Fun. I just, because I think so many, it's not quantifiable. I can't back this up, but so many early childhood people just take great delight in thrift stores, and some feel like everything has to come from the catalog, and it really is another one of those little divides among us to see what we can get, and it's one of my favorite things to do, because then I think also families get to see that. So it's advocacy. It's good to do those things with the children, but if we can find a way to show the families what we're doing, to talk about why it is science or math or technology or engineering, then it's a little bit of appropriate family education and advocacy.
That's really cool. I never thought it that way.
Much more authentic parent education than a lot of what our parent education efforts look like sometimes.
Yeah, and what I'm hoping to go back to the book series is because it's an ebook and it's on that classroom tablet. The teacher is running the activity, but then the tablet's not doing anything, but it can be there to take pictures. But it's not in the children's hands. That teacher's able to take those pictures, so then you can do that advocacy. So I forgot that that's the final piece, is working with the parents.
And so then they're using the camera, but the camera isn't the activity. I mean, the tablet isn't the activity. It's a piece of the whole process. It's a tool. And I think that also gives kids, and maybe your co-teachers, who knows, really, I guess, appropriate modeling of an appropriate way to use that screen or that tablet or whatever it is, and that it's not sedentary. It's not just for sitting and looking at, or sitting and, playing games on or something like that. So lots of good packed in, also a really fun thing to do. And
it keeps them engaged that way. And then too, there's really cool meta things you can do with a tablet. So one of the sound technologies, which is actually going to be in a later book of this series, is using a decibel meter and using a pitch creator, which there are little apps that do. And so suddenly that tablet is really doing the work of advancing the technology from a low tech to high tech. And kids are seeing how that happens. So I think that's kind of another advantage of being strictly an ebook.
Okay. I would never have thought about that. But I see that connection. So sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. I get
it's okay. I always talk too fast.
No, that was completely my fault. This is excellent pod right now. I know the listeners like it best when I talk about what I can't remember.
We all sympathize because we're like, we remembered everything today.
Right. That Heather, what a fool for forgetting things. I sure would never do that. Well, I feel like I put myself in this position of being a talker, so I should never run out of things to talk about. So this is just really interesting. And I think that, I don't know, I feel like you've really presented some topics that, one, are sometimes scary for early childhood teachers and childcare providers to take on, but also just that idea that it has to cost a lot of money, or you have to have specifically the stuff from the catalog science section to do these things. So I think you've given those two groups sort of a light to follow, to move forward with offering these things for kids. And I think that's great.
It's interesting to hear about that divide there, because there's a lot about the classroom and classroom teachers that I'm still understanding.
It's a whole culture that requires anthropological study. In my opinion. So if you've got that early childhood anthropologist somewhere that you know of, send them.
Okay.
We'll talk. Anything else that you wanted to talk about or mention, Laura, when you were thinking about coming on?
On this podcast, it's just great to sort of be here and be involved with it.
Yeah.
And I feel welcomed, even as a non-ECE nerd necessarily. I'm driving that way.
Yeah. It's great.
But yeah, so it's been a fun journey becoming the Science Fairy, and the Science Fairy, or that Science Fairy, whichever one it is.
Yeah.
And so it's just been fun listening to you and hearing from your audience and your guests about things that I didn't know. And now we talked about things that you didn't know.
Yeah, that's right. I am learning as we're talking, and I love when I get to do that. A lot of times I just, pick somebody who knows all the things I know and shares the opinions I have, and we just rant about it, as you know, if you've listened. But every now and again I get someone who really teaches me something. So thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So if anyone wants to get the books, they're at books.that Science Fairy, like that early childhood, book.that Science Fairy with a Y.com. And I have a little quiz up for EC. It's my best understanding of EC. I'm going to send you the quiz, Heather, because I did this quiz for ECE people to get like their guide type.
Okay.
There's 10 different guide types. So people can take that and then sort of see at the very end of that how it relates to the book and how it can relate to their classroom. So.
Oh, that's a cool idea. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
Well, I'll send it over.
Awesome. Yeah. And thanks for mentioning. I was just going to say, better give them your website again so they can order, or better give them that link to the book. Yeah. That's great.
I got it. It was a struggle, but it's there.
You got there. We did it together. All right. Thank you very much, Laura, for coming on and for all that you're doing. And we'll be in touch, I'm sure. And thank you everybody for listening to another episode. And that's all for that early childhood nerd this week.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.